I'm very excited about today's video because I'm just going to be sharing my favorite books. I did my 5 best books that I own video a little while back, and I made a distinction between what I consider to be the best literature that I own and just what are my favorites. So today I'm going to share with you the books that I have read and reread. I am not a big rereader. Usually I read a book once, and the idea of going back through it, I'm like, but there are so many other books. But in this case, these are books that I have reread probably multiple times, or at least have gotten halfway through it multiple times. To give you an idea of my general book liking, my taste, I have found that I need a book to sound good. I need a book to be written well, for the language to be beautiful. I very much want really good characterization. I love getting a sense of getting to know somebody's internal being, really feeling like the narrator or the point of view that you're in is getting to know a real person. Those are the things that are really important to me. I am not so much big on plot or twists or tension. I have a lot of anxiety, so I kind of like when books are more introspective and just give you that either a warm, fuzzy feeling or a good, I'm not the only one who's this messed up kind of feeling. So those are kind of the characteristics that I am looking for when I want a book. So these are my top 5 favorites. What I'm hoping to do with this video is that I will share some of my most loved favorites, and that might encourage you to go pick them up if it sounds like something you might be interested in. There's some well-known ones with well-known authors, and a couple that maybe are a little lesser well-known. I'm doing 5 books. These are my top 5 books that I own physical copies of. I did not try to think of everything that I've ever read on ebook. That seems like way too much to narrow down. So I'm just going off of, already I have a lot of physical books in my house. So I'm just going off of what I have physically. Let us begin. These are in no particular order, except I am saving my number 1 favorite book that I have definitely reread the most for last. Let's get into them. The first one you've probably heard of, and you've almost certainly heard of the author. Apparently he's getting real big with Gen Z, which I think is great and hilarious. Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is why I started taking Russian in college. My goal was to be able to read Dostoevsky in the original. This is still my goal. I'm still practicing Russian. The funny thing is that turned out really convenient because I'm marrying a Russian. So it's a good thing I started taking classes. But I really love Notes from Underground. I actually read it for the first time in high school. I have several mental illnesses, and this book felt very relatable. I'm also amazed by how I get something different out of it every time. And it's so introspective that I really think anyone who reads it will come away with something different. If you don't want to read something where a guy is sitting alone in a room thinking about how much he hates himself and hates everybody else, you probably won't like this because that's what this is. But I love it. Do I need to go on about how good of a writer Dostoevsky is? I feel like other people have gone on about it for hundreds of years, so I'll just leave it at that. If you have not read Dostoevsky and you don't feel like picking up a huge chunk of book like Crime and Punishment, which I'm reading right now, of course that's super good, but this one's short, which is cool. And it's actually very stream of consciousness, which I really love about the writing and was new for the time. So very cool. The next book is another classic, although I don't hear a lot of other people talk about it. but it is one of my most beloved favorites and has been since childhood. A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. So this is about an Irish family, in particular a young girl named Francie, at the turn of the century. So 1899, 1900. If you hear jingling and complaining in the background, it's my dog, Lyle. He's adorable. This is Lyle. He's so mad at me. Lyle! Lyle, look at the camera. Lyle. See how pretty he is. That's my pretty boy. This book is a time machine into an extremely interesting period in American history. It's near and dear to my heart because a lot of it is about this Irish family. They're not immigrants, but, you know, the child of immigrants or the child of immigrants in this Irish-German neighborhood at the turn of the century that had a lot of immigrants. And that's very much like my family. I had family who came around that time from Russia. I also had a lot of family who came at various times of German and Irish origin. So it's interesting to see this time period and also kind of think about how it might have been for my family. It's also just a classic tale of growing up. You follow Francie from being quite a little girl to her first job, her first romance. And it's beautifully written. It's so gorgeous. And of course, Francie loves books. And there's trips to the library. And it's just, I love it. So if you need a book that is beautifully written and maybe makes you feel a little cozy, you don't mind bad things happening in your book, but you want maybe a little dose of optimism, then this is a good book for you. I love it. The next book is a big girl, is a hefty girl, but I have read it in full at least twice and read chunks of it at various other times. I, Elizabeth by Rosalind Miles. If you read historical fiction at all, you might recognize Rosalind Miles. This book is particularly amazing because it is literally Elizabeth I's whole life. I think the first memory she talks about in here, she would have been like 3, and right up until her death. And I am someone who has at various times and still has a hyperfixation on Queen Elizabeth I and the Elizabethan period, and it's just so like brought to life in this book. And of course the writing is sumptuous, and of course the descriptions are beautiful, but you really do get the feeling that you're getting to know Elizabeth I in this. It's a very personal portrait of someone who was not really allowed to have a personal life. I'm not like an Elizabethan scholar in particular. I have a whole shelf of books about her, and this felt pretty good to me. It felt pretty aligned with the history that I had read. Sometimes I read books about Queen Elizabeth or, you know, like this period, the Tudors, and I'm like, that's not right. But I'm also like, I just love the period. But I think the scope of this book is what is so amazing. And just how you truly feel like you were seeing the world through Elizabeth's eyes. Super amazing. Definitely one of my favorites. You can tell, like, I'm not capping, as the kids say, because these books are all beat up from how often I have read them. Well loved at the corners. The next book is definitely one of my all-time favorites. It's in a bit of a different style from what I've shown you so far. It's Cardinal, book 1 of the Citadel series. This is a fast-paced, action-packed laugh riot of an adventure featuring a hero, an anti-hero, who's great for fans of Harley Quinn or Deadpool or, you know, madcap characters like that. And I hear the author is gorgeous. She's absolutely beautiful. Okay, it's my book. It's my book. I wrote this one. But if you don't like your books, who else is going to? Is what I always say, especially when I'm plugging my books. I also think that the cover is like just super cool and it's a good looking book. Just thought I'd throw that in there. If you like humor in your books, if you want to read something that's violent yet lighthearted, this is the book for you. It is honestly one of my favorites, but it's not counting towards the 5 I promised to share with you today. I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned it and put the cover in front of you, because doesn't it look so cool? And hopefully the sequel's coming out this year. Hopefully. The actual 4th book that I have for you. This one is actually nonfiction. It is one of my favorites that I ever read and had a huge impact on me ever since I read it in college for a class about losing your religion. Mephistopheles, the Devil in the Modern World. It is part of a collection about depictions of the devil in art, in media, in religious texts, in pop culture at various times. We've always had pop culture. There's always been stuff that's popular and people talk about. This series goes from very, very early mentions of the devil. This is the 4th and final volume in the series. It goes from the Reformation, from the Christian Reformation to modern day. Not like all the way up to modern day, because this book is published 1986, so it goes up until the 80s. I was just completely fascinated by this book. I wrote an essay using it as a source on another really good book called I have it on my shelf. What's it called? The Club du Mas, which is very much about this like secret society and various obsessions with the occult. But I talked about that and another movie from the 70s about, I think it was called Bedazzled. I'm not sure. But it's about this guy who the devil shows up and is trying to get him to make a deal, right? Because this guy is lonely and alienated by modern society. So one of the things that really interested me that this book talked about a lot is that the devil is on Earth. The devil exists. In the modern age, we don't have a lot of visitations from God. We don't have a lot of physical manifestations of God. This wasn't true in a lot of eras. A lot of eras, people saw saints and people saw angels. And then, for some reason, since the Reformation, we've almost had an easier time connecting to God and religion through the devil. Like, he's easier for us to grasp and think of as walking among us. So that was one aspect of this book that I thought was really interesting. The essay that I wrote was called "You See Me, So I Am Here for You." And it's basically this violinist was asking the devil, like, are you really here? And the devil said, you see me, so I am here for you. And that has a couple of different interesting meanings, right? It's, well, you can see me, right? So according to you, I'm here. But it's also the fact that if we can see something directly in front of us, it's easier to grasp. It's here. We can get a hold on it. So I was just very interested in why, in the most recent periods, the devil is one of us, walks among us in seems so much more accessible than God. There are movies and things that also show angels, but really interesting stuff about depictions of the devil in literature, art, media, etc. throughout this book. Time for my number 1 top most read favoritist book of all time. I started reading this book in high school. It had a huge impact on my whole life. Just really changed a lot about my direction, and I love it. And I go back to it all the time and get something new out of it. And I'm probably going to even write a book that's partially inspired by it at some point. Without further ado, here it is, my number 1 pick, Tam Lin by Pamela Dean. Pamela Dean. You can see how well loved this book is because it's just like lost the corners. I have read this book a lot since I got it in high school. It is a retelling of a Scottish ballad called Tam Lin. I actually don't want to tell you any more about it. You don't need to know the ballad to enjoy this book. It's got a lot of elements of fantasy, but really what this book is about is being an English major in the early 70s. Being a young woman studying English at a small liberal arts college in the early 70s. If you don't like books about books, you're not going to like this. If you don't want a book where, like, a pretty guy quotes Greek poetry at you, you're not going to like this. But that was my shit. This is my shit. I love this book so much. It's so pretty. It's so pretty to read, and the characters are all witty and smart, and they go to Shakespeare plays, and they talk about books, and they make witty comments about books while they listen to records, and I just love it too much. There's a lot of things about this book that might really annoy some people, but if you just want to dive into the feeling of being 20, 18 to 20, it's like the whole college experience is in here if you like the idea of like a small liberal arts college. And then there's some fantasy elements in there too, which I would almost call it magical realism, because most of the book is so realistic and it's just kind of pointing out how weird college is. Like the magic pretty much serves to point out what a weird time college is. I loved it before I went to college when I read in high school, and it definitely cemented my goal of becoming an English major. It kind of changed what schools I was looking at. I ended up going to a small liberal arts college, although I went to one somewhere warmer than she goes to. She's in Minnesota. I considered it, but I did not want to have to deal with Minnesota winters. So I did not do that. And then I loved reading it in college because, hey, I'm doing this thing. And then I love reading it after college because it reminds me of all the things that I liked about college. And it allows me to be nostalgic, both for things that I really lived through and things that were complete fantasies fueled by this book. Tam Lin by Pamela Dean. Wholeheartedly recommend if you like books about books, like really like books about books. Like if you read a book and you're like, they just talked about books the whole time, that's awesome. This like whole thing is just conversations about books, what classes she wants to take in college, and like how pretty the leaves look in the fall. That's this whole book, and I love it. I love it so much. So that is my number one favorite book of all time. Those are my top 5 favorites. Let me know your favorite books in the comments. I'm always looking for new favorites, new things to love. I'm thinking at some point I'm going to make like a 5 silliest books I own, or maybe like a 5 funniest books I own, because there was some books I almost picked up to talk to you about in this video, and I was like, it's not that I love this book, it's that it's so silly it makes me laugh. So I might do one like that. Let me know if you've read any of these and if you like them, and if you pick any of them up, I would be happy to hear about what you think about them. I hope I presented them accurately so that you don't like go pick up my most beloved book and you're like, this is shit, Riley. I didn't like this none bit. That's the accent I assume you have if you hate Tam Lin. JK. Like I said, these are totally just my favorites. It's subjective. I like pretty words about books, in books. And also books about the devil. If you see me, then I am here for you. Ugh, creepy. Thank you so much for joining me. I will be back next month with either some cartoon reaction videos or some more book recommendations. So make sure you subscribe and like this video. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next month for more. Say bye, Lyle. Bye.